So this tutorial is going to focus on shape language in Silhouette and how we can use it to communicate certain ideas, emotions and moods in your art. Stay tuned. Yes mate, thanks for tuning in. I'm Renato, and as always this show is powered by conceptstart.net, the place where you can go for some instant art inspiration. So today we're going to be discussing shapes as a visual language and silhouette. Shapes tend to have prescribed meanings. Why we have these kind of innate feelings about shapes, who knows? We're going to explore a little bit about that, but mostly we need to concern ourselves with designing shapes and using it in our design process, because ultimately shapes are used to convey certain emotions and evoke responses from our audience, and to differentiate between the good guys and the bad guys, and to elicit the response that we want. Design is a very deliberate process. We design with intent. We need to understand how shapes is part of that intent. So let's talk about shapes. There's different types of shapes, they're all around us and they come in lots of different sizes. Yesterday I went for a walk and I sat by a bench and I came across something and I thought that classically demonstrates the power of shape language. So take a look. So this is a weed, which is typically associated with a negative emotion. I won't talk too much just yet about the shapes involved, but just to compare, I saw some daisies that contrast the weed in terms of their overall shape. A daisy has positive connotations attached to it. Without even studying the shapes, you can get a certain feeling for each one. So I think that our responses to certain shapes is ultimately conditioned by nature and perhaps past experiences. Side by side, you can see a clear difference and know which you're most likely to stay away from. So let's start by exploring some shapes as a visual language. Shapes are usually broken down into three main categories. We've got organic shapes, represents things found in nature. They tend to be free-flowing with a variety of shapes from symmetrical to non-symmetrical. You can expect butterflies, bugs and plant life to shapes like clouds and waves that are randomly formed and free. Geometric shapes are the basic types of shapes that you learn from an early age, such as squares, rectangles, circles, triangles and crosses, etc. They often have symmetry and have a structured look and feel with sharp edges and angles. Then we have abstract shapes, which are simplified forms distinct from being organic or geometric. They're often a fusion of the two, and they're abstract in nature because we have intervened. Through design, they have had a process of thought behind them. So today we want to mostly concern ourselves with geometric and abstract shapes, although we do want to look at organic shapes because we draw inspiration from that, but by the time we've gone through the design process, which is a very specific and deliberate process, they become abstract shapes anyway. So now we're going to explore the psychology behind shapes. As you know already, shapes are made up of lines, and even lines give a certain impression of things. Horizontal lines suggest rest and stability. Vertical lines suggest height and power. Diagonal lines suggest movement and instability. Curved lines are soft and safe. Sharp angled lines are chaotic, uneasy and suggest speed. So let's see how these lines convert into shapes, and then we can consider the ultimate meaning that they convey through the shape. Circles suggest the infinite, unity and harmony with a sense of movement that contains energy and power. They are less common, so work well to attract the attention and set things apart. They represent community, integrity and perfection, planets, wheels, balls, fruits, and offer a feeling of well-roundedness and completeness. Squares and rectangles create a sense of equality and conformity. The familiar shape can be seen as strong, stable, trusting, orderly, rest, equality and peace. The number 4, four corners, is associated with very material things of this world. Triangles suggest movement, direction and steadiness depending on which way they point, up or down. They can be stable or unstable. Triangles have energy and power and suggest conflict or strength. Other associations could be progression, purpose, self-discovery, hierarchy, law, religion, tension, action, and so on. Spirals are often found in nature and are expressions of creativity. They suggest the process of growth and evolution. Double spirals can be used to symbolize opposing forces. Other associations could be fertility, birth and death, transformation, and a journey. Crosses are seen as the cross point of divine energies. They represent the self and the interaction between vertical associations such as height and horizontal associations such as rest. They can be used to suggest life and healing, faith, unity, hope, relationships, balance, and spirituality. So these shapes are essentially an alphabet, and when mixed together in different ways, they create specific visual words that communicate certain ideas. So taking these principles, now let's look at some images that have been specifically designed with shape language in mind. We should be able to see the intent that the designer had for the kind of the feelings and emotions to convey to the audience. Let's take the film Madagascar. This scene demonstrates a peaceful setting fusing soft curved lines with some stable horizontal elements. We can begin to see the transition into a more sinister environment. Even the shapes begin to transition with more verticals and subtle points at the ends of the shapes, so that you know further down the path will lead Fusa's territory. Until finally, the darker place, which is described by tall jagged rocks, come to a point as the main shape is set up. These rocky mountains suggest a sense of danger and unease, which is completely different to the shape of the mountain seen in the previous image. This mountain is stable and almost rectangular. It looks like something you can take refuge on, which is almost a polar opposite of the mountains in Fusa's territory. Now moving on to the monster house animation. This first image describes a typical house in the neighborhood. With the rectangular shapes, it suggests security, and there's a sense of symmetry in the design, which also suggests there is harmony. It feels complete. This next image, we see the monster house before turning in transition. Something isn't quite right about it. There's no symmetry. One of the windows looks out of place. It's very odd looking. We can almost make out a face in it with the mouth and two eyes for the windows. The diagonal shadows cut into the scene to add more tension. The sharp points hint towards the danger, and the trees appear to have no leaves, which suggests death. They also appear to be mini figures. The final image, we see how it has turned into the monster house. The tiles on the roof are jagged with sporadic holes, and there's no more horizontal lines to suggest any sense of rest or stability. The sharp jagged teeth again at diagonals to add more sense of unrest. This evil house is framed by the trees which cut into the scene at an angle. They add to the overall shape of the house and reduce the feeling of vertical lines. This house is alive through the glowing eyes of the windows, and we can notice more so how each eye has a slightly different shape, which again takes away any sense of harmony. Now let's see the difference between the antagonist and the protagonist character faces in the film Ants. So who's the good guys and who's the bad guys? To me it's quite obvious. The main bad guy has much harsher features. The eyes are sunken in and the shapes are very angular, which are enhanced in contrast to the block-like chin, which is a testament to his strength of character. He doesn't come across very evil, but he's harsh and mean. Now the good guys should be blatantly obvious. We have much softer shapes, the eyes have less detail, which makes us feel more relaxed when we look at them. They're bigger, rounder, and generally more comforting. You should also notice the differences in colour, which is another tool that can be used to reinforce certain feelings and moods. And finally, a look at Jungle Book's good guys and bad guys. This is some concept art by one of my favourite artists, Michael Kutch. For Baloo, the friendly bear, we have soft and rounded shapes, especially in the face. And Shere Khan, he has a lot more pointy shapes going on. By nature, the tiger has jagged stripes which are striking. The hair around his face isn't completely straight, they waver in parts and come to a sharp point. His whiskers are also jagged, which reflects his character. So hopefully now you can see how shapes are deliberately used in the design process to portray and convey certain feelings, emotions and moods. Whether we're drawing from life or imagination, we always need to be aware and conscious of the design shapes that we're putting down. We should be asking ourselves, what's the main idea and how are we communicating that idea? What shapes are we using? How can the shapes fortify the idea? What do you want the audience to take away from the design? And so basically understanding shape language will help you achieve the sensibility of, making the audience feel something specific. So this brings us to silhouette. By definition, a silhouette is the dark shape and outline of someone or something visible in restricted light. So essentially it creates a block shape. So let's take a look at some iconic characters. These iconic characters have stood the test of time in the entertainment industry, from video games, cartoons and blockbuster movies. You should be able to recognize them, or they should at least seem familiar. It's likely that at some point in your life you've been exposed to them, and they seem familiar because they all have strong silhouettes. They're simple and original, and they stick in your mind. Can you guess this next one? Maleficent is a dark character set in a natural forest environment. The shapes used fortify this, as we have the large leaf-like shapes around her neck and the twisted horns that suggest a devilish streak. It's simple but extremely effective. Now let's go back and study some characters from Madagascar. First up, Madagascar himself. He's a friendly chap, stable and loyal, which shows in the shape language used in his design. A fusion of diagonals for movement and rectangles for stability, rounded off to suggest he has a friendly nature. Gloria is a larger-than-life character. She's full of large, round curves and comes across as comical, especially since her feet are extremely small compared to the rest of her upper body. And then we have Melman. He's super nice but a little goofy. This is expressed through the use of soft curves with some angular shapes that come across a little crooked. Okay, so now I want to do some demonstrations and show how we can explore shape language in Silhouette through various tasks. And I'm going to utilize the art generator that I created. It's on the website, there's a link in the description, and essentially what it does is it helps us to explore shape language through various tasks from different perspectives. You can get a rounded off sense of shape language as a whole, really. And then the final one is the shape stamp. It's essentially a study, and then by copying the scenes we can stamp over the top an interpretation of shape language that's suggested by the generator and incorporate different design elements to essentially create different feeling. So let's see what we come out with. So starting out with the emotional route first, Shape X. I generated a task that requires me to design an evil tree. The design process starts by generating a mood board or finding pre-existing images of things that come across as evil. You can begin to draw over some of the lines and shapes across a variety of sources. This will enable you to explore a more diverse range of ideas. Once you're happy with the shapes you pulled out from the reference, separate and spread them out. Make sure you have references for all keywords in play. So for me it was tree and evil. Both are crucial to the design process. Here I begin to explore some new shapes by fusing the shapes I discovered in the mood board. We can play with these shapes, push and pull them, distort them, stretch them and so on, all the time bearing in mind the shape psychology that we've just learned. After I have my base sketches down, I begin to refine them and add in more design elements with more refined shape language through lines. Because the idea of Evil Tree needs to communicate through the shape language of the line art and the silhouette, I view them separately and decide on my favourite. The ones that have ticks for both states is my clear winner because they work on both levels. Following the same process, I found images to influence my shape design first. This task was a dangerous house. You can clearly see all the different design elements that have been incorporated based on the shape language found and discovered in the reference material. Sometimes when you check the overall design in silhouette form, you can get a different type of read, a different perspective or view on the brief at hand. So because I felt that this particular design wasn't quite dangerous enough, I tweaked the silhouette slightly, which pushed it that bit further for me. So this is a task from ShapeY Task Generator, which focuses on exploring a design process through shape first. I was prompted to explore diagonal lines with cross shapes when designing armor. So when fusing these shapes together and lines into my designs, I found that the results were generally suggesting a feeling of strength, a dynamic sense of strength. They also seem somewhat ambiguous in terms of being good and bad. And the third generator is the shape stamp. This is where we take existing images or scenes to study from, but we're looking to actually loosely copy the compositional elements in the scene and recreate them by tweaking the shapes and conveying a different feeling overall. In this example, I'll be using spikes and spirals to influence the design. To help me achieve this, I use the lasso tool with a textured Photoshop brush. It's a good practice to use grayscale only. This forces you to focus solely on the lights and the darks and the overall shape design. We can use colour, but it's going to complicate things a little more because obviously colour influences the mood and motion of the piece, and if we focus on the lights and the darks, then the shape language should speak a little louder. As artists, we have a creative license to entertain. So long as we can make the viewer feel something, they'll accept what we present to them even if it's not quite lifelike. So long as it's rooted in reality enough for people to relate, we can push it enough to pack it with substance, meaning and magic. It's one thing to create pretty pictures, but we can go beyond and manipulate the shapes to create different moods and feelings. Now, if we compare the two versions, you should see that mine has a slightly different feel to it. It's somewhat surreal with the use of the curly branches and has a sense of unease with the spiked leaves and the sharp angular shapes and lines throughout. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully by now you've got a good understanding of how you can use shape as a language to communicate certain ideas and convey certain moods and feelings and emotions to your audience through your design process. It's a universal principle, shape language. It's not something specific to just concept art. We can use it throughout, and so we need to understand it and we need to be aware of it, and hopefully it can improve us as artists and design with intent. That's the goal. So until next episode, where we're going to explore line art and stylization, some great artists, and we're going to leech some style from some of the best artists around from the past and present. Hopefully we can add some flair into our own work. That is all from me, and I will see you later.